We are here for the Finance Committee for September 24th, 2024. Can we get the roll call, please?
We'll start with Committee Member Harmon.
Here.
Vice Chair Friedman.
Here.
Chair Gutierrez.
Here. Do we have any public comment for today?
Chair Gutierrez, no hands are raised.
Thank you, and we'll move up to our first item in the agenda, please.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, members of the Finance Committee. My name is Keith DiMartini. I'm the city's Finance Director. I'm here with Ms. Natalie LaCulley, the city's Controller. It is our pleasure to present an overview of the fourth quarter financial review for fiscal year 2024. The recommendation before the Finance Committee is listed here on the screen. I won't read it verbatim, but there are basically 4 items for recommendation. The first is to simply receive the report of the preliminary year-end results for fiscal year 2024. I will say that a couple times today, that these results are preliminary. We will not finalize the fiscal year-end results until the conclusion of all of the entries that need to go in, all of the final reconciliation work, which typically gets done around December. Sometimes it goes into January. That's when the results will be final. The second recommendation is to accept the 12-month report. The third recommendation is to recommend that council adopts a resolution to approve of the final budget adjustments for Q4. And then the fourth recommendation is to approve of a few position reclassification requests, which are outlined in the council agenda report before you today as well. So the agenda is to go through first the general fund. We'll provide an overview of revenues and expenditures. We'll then go through all the enterprise funds. We'll talk about the proposed budget adjustments, the position changes, and then take questions, public comment, and discussion. So first, just a reminder of how and when the cadence of our financial review and updates to the Finance Committee goes. We produce a monthly financial statement that goes into the consent calendar on the council agenda at the conclusion of every month. On a quarterly basis, we bring this presentation to the Finance Committee where we go a little bit deeper. We talk about the revenue and expenditure trends. We do some projections. Here we are at Q4 where we're really reporting on preliminary year-end results. And then we plan to issue our annual comprehensive financial report in December. So now let's jump into the general fund. Let me first start with our general fund multi-year forecast. This is a long-range financial forecast that we produce annually at the very, very beginning stages of our annual budget development process. This is that graph where we show our revenues and our expenditures, not only the past couple of years of actual history, but also our current year projection in fiscal year 2024 and then going forward. And as you can see, we do have a general fund deficit. It is a structural deficit because it shows a widening of that gap in the out years. So as the years go on, the growth of our expenditures is exceeding the growth of our revenues. We're not saying that our revenues aren't growing. That's not at all what we're saying. Our revenues are growing. They're just not growing at the same rate that we're projecting our expenditures to grow. This next graph shows how our revenues come in the general fund. We are pretty fortunate here that our revenues are pretty diverse. We have a good amount of property tax revenue that comes in, sales tax revenue, transient occupancy tax, and a number of other taxes that are a little bit smaller in nature. And then general fund departments do generate certain fees for services that we offer to the public and the community as well. The vast majority of those general fund revenue sources are spent on salaries and benefits of staff that work in general fund departments, primarily police and fire, which accounts for 50% of the total general fund budget. So now let's talk about where we are preliminarily are ending up at the end of fiscal year. This table here shows our revenues and our expenditures in the general fund only, and it's showing what our adopted budget was. And if the Finance Committee may recall, the City Council did adopt a budget in fiscal year 2024 with a projected deficit of $2.9 million. There are a number of actions that occurred from after the budget was initially adopted back in June, with changes that the City Council chose to make through the operating year. And then also the annual process of carrying forward appropriation from a prior fiscal year into fiscal year 2024 for commitments that the organization has made from a prior year. So a really simple example is when we have a multi-year contract with a vendor, we might appropriate that money all in fiscal year 2023, and then we have a portion of it that's going to get expended in fiscal year 2024. That additional expenditure appropriation is shown in the revised budget in that $227.8 million figure. And then where we're actually ending up is a projected deficit of $7.7 million. You can see that our revenues are slightly lower than the revised budget. We are showing our expenditures coming in lower as well. But when you put the two together, it is showing a projected deficit of $7.7 million. So now let's go into this in a little bit more detail. I already talked about the carry forward, so we'll skip through there. Let's first talk about our revenues, and then I'll pass it over to Ms. Licoli for the rest of the presentation. This table here shows our major general fund tax revenues. And what it shows is the adopted budget, revised budget, and then where our year-end results are showing. And as you can see at the total line, our taxes came in at 99% of what we budgeted them to come in at. So pretty close to the actual budget. You can see that property tax and our utility users tax came in a little bit higher. And you can see that some of our other taxes came in a little bit lower. But when you put it all together, it came in at 99% of our adopted budget. And then this graph here is just a graphical representation of the prior slide. It's showing the adopted budget versus revised budget versus our actual budget. And there really are no major discrepancies or changes that are noteworthy on this slide to speak of. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Licoli.
Thank you, Mr. DiMartini. Good afternoon, Chair Gutierrez and member of the committee. Short-term rental enforcement program. So the short-term rental program result for fiscal year 24 concluded with 58 settlements, or $590,000, for which an additional $124,000 went to Measure B. As a reminder, the Measure B is allocated for the restoration of creeks and improvement of water quality within the city of Santa Barbara. Now I will discuss the general fund expenditure. Again, as a reminder, the next slides are primary result, as we'll still need to work on audit items such as grant reconciliation. That said, the major takeaway for the next two slides is that all departments came in under budget compared to the revised budget. The general fund is at 89% of budget, or $22.3 million. City attorney finished the year at 73% of its budget due to vacancies that are still open. Police department is still challenged by vacancy, when the fire department increased the budget by $3.5 million to line up with actual. The increase is actually mostly due to payroll expenses. The offset of both departments result in public safety to end the year at 93% of revised budget, or $90.2 million. Next, please. Park and Recreation, they ended the year at 94% of revised budget, with a combination of lower expenditure related to projects that will be carried over to the next year, and increase in expenses related to disaster costs. Library. The library had a challenging year with multi-closure due to winter storm and required repair. Some savings are related to vacant position and adult education programs that were heavily subsidized by grant. The community service finished the year at 94% of its revised budget. Public work is at 91% of budget due to vacancy and turnover for engineering and land development, and positions are now filled. Sustainability and resiliency is at 27% of its budget. As a reminder, this department took over a division of public work, environmental remediation. This is an area that is directly tied to projects like capital projects. And when there is a delay, the cost related to remediation is as well on hold. There was a request for additional funds during the year, but ultimately only 20% of the revised budget was used. Community development is at 90% of budget due to vacancy through the year. Measure C. The Measure C in fiscal year 24, we budgeted to expand additional revenue that were collected for fiscal year 22 and fiscal year 23, or $46.8 million. The revised budget realigned the budget to equal the actual yearly Measure C revenue collected. Non-departmental is a combination of budgeted saving that we had anticipated, we were hoping for $6 million, and as well a combination of transfers out. So at the end, the result for all the general fund expenditure is at $215.4 million, or 92% of budget, with a remaining $9.50 million after taking in account the encumbrance. Next, please. So we have a graph to illustrate an overall pictures of the fund, the general fund expenditures. As we can see, we have in first column the adopted, then revised, and year-to-date actual for the year fiscal year 24, which seems that everybody has been trying the best as to being in control to the expenditure, and all the department came below the revised budget for the expenditure for fiscal year 24. Can we move? Thank you. So now we're going to move into enterprise fund, and we're going to discuss the revenue and the expenditure and the result for the year. Solid waste fund added $1.3 million to its reserve for this year. Revenue came above budget and was ahead of fiscal year 23 by 4.7 million. This positive performance is due to fees, service charge increase, and positive return on investment. Expenses are in line with budget. Clean Energy Fund. Clean Energy Fund results are currently at a surplus of 21.2 millions that will be added to their reserve. Increase in customer usage is the main driver for this positive result in revenue, or 8% above the revised budget. Expenses are slightly understated. We are waiting for additional costs related to power supplies Southern California Edison need to provide us. Water Fund. The Water Fund revenue is at 96% of its budget. Water supply demand came lower than expected due to rainy season we had during the winter. Expenses are 88% of budget as the desal plant was shut down for 2 months and the department had delayed with equipment upgrade and maintenance on the facilities. So for fiscal year 24, the department used 4.5 million of their reserve. Wastewater. The wastewater department revenue is more predictable than water demand. The fund was on target with revised budget and came almost at a neutral position in a similar result as we had for fiscal year 23. Next, please. Airport. The airport ended the fiscal year by adding a slight $800,000 to its reserve. Revenue is on target with budget. In comparison to fiscal year 23, an additional 3.4 million was generated. Expenses are lower than budget due to a combination of salary saving, reduction in supply, services, and special projects that will be carried over to fiscal year 25. Waterfront. The waterfront had a similar operation result as fiscal year 23. Revenue increased due to income from return on investment, but decreased due to a decline in rent collected by property management. Expenses for 18.4 million is below budget as management decided to leave open position vacant. And the end result for fiscal year 24, it's an additional 1.5 million in reserve against a projected loss of $300,000. The Golf Fund revenue kept a steady increase for the year when expenses are under control, and the department added 1.1 million to its reserve for fiscal year 24. And finally, the downtown parking. The downtown parking is challenged by the reduction in parking revenue due to vacancy in commercial building in downtown, business that failed to submit their assessment, and a decline in commuter permit revenue. Total revenue for fiscal year 24 is at 91% of budget. Expenses were monitored closely despite the increase in electricity and unexpected repair costs. Downtown parking used 1 million of their reserve for this year operation. And that's it for that. Now I'm going to move on into the proposed budget adjustment. I'm just going to read the three of the main one for the general fund. We request an increase in appropriation in building maintenance to align fiscal year 24 budget with building maintenance rate model, which is $590,000. We request an increase in appropriation to correct the fiscal year 22 and 23 underpayment for Schedule 1 leased fire truck from the fire department to the free replacement fund for a value of $313,000. And we ask as well to have an increase in estimated revenue to transfer in from airport operation fund to reimburse the police department for staff member $278,000 or $279,000. There's as well other adjustment requested that I would let you read for the water departments, for other department that we have as well listed there. I'm going to have Mr. DeMartini to take over. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So we'll just wrap up today with some of the proposed position changes that are in your council agenda report as well. As the committee may recall, there is a quarterly process to work with the Human Resources Department for any departments that need to have a position reclassification for a variety of different reasons. We'll package those with this quarterly report going before you every quarter going forward. There are a couple of position planners and long-range planning to support the housing element in the packet today. There's a reclassification of a geographic information systems coordinator in the Information Technology Department. There's a senior library technician position reclassification, an increase of 2 not quite full-time positions in the library to make them full-time, and then a library circulation supervisor position as well. And then there are a number of other reclassifications in the police department, fleet, street maintenance, crew leader position, public works, waterfront, and the waterfront department. And so those are listed here on this slide as well. Again, there's a description and the purpose for the reclassifications in the council agenda report before you today. And staff are here as well to answer any questions that you might have on those position changes. Again, we're back to staff recommendations that are before you today. And that concludes our presentation. We'd be happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you very much.
Do we have any questions? Yeah. Councilmember Friedman?
Thank you, Chair Gutierrez. A couple questions. If you could pull up slide 13. Perfect. Just a question on the police budget. You mentioned that it was with vacancies. That's why it's at the 89% because of the expenditures, because there was a number of vacancies. And so that's how we were able to achieve the budget that we have. That's still a deficit budget overall. Part of it was because we had the vacancies in the police department. And if we had fully funded or if those vacancies had been filled, the deficit would be even more.
Yes, Vice Chair Friedman, that is correct. If the police department and all the other general fund departments, I'll add as well, if they were able to fill the positions that were required to be held vacant, then the deficit would be worse. And so the police department, because it is the largest portion of the general fund operating departments, had the largest general fund reduction target, and so they were required to hold multiple positions vacant, which they did, and they achieved savings because of it.
And so as we look forward to try to fill those vacancies, that's part of one of the previous slides where you're looking at the growth in revenue versus the growth of expenditures. Those expenditures we're expecting to increase or decrease the vacancies in the police department. So we want to plan for that, but that's part of what's driving that. Not just the police, but all those. We want to try to fill them all, but the police, because it's such a large portion of it, and we're trying to fill those vacancies, those come with expenditures.
Yes, Councilor Freeman, you're absolutely right. And if for clarity, I believe you're referring to the multi-year forecast graph here, as far as our outward growth trajectory for our expenses and our revenues. And when we produce our multi-year forecast, it's important to note that we produce it based on our current levels of service. And so what it assumes is that we are fully staffed and we are operating our existing service levels. So for the police department in particular, we will assume that we are able to fill those positions. That's how the model is produced. As we work through the budget process, if we have to make decisions about balancing our budget, we will do that at that time.
Okay, so with that line, even with all the departments with those vacancies, that assumes that we would fill those vacancies. Okay.
Yes, that's correct.
That's a good point. That's a good point to understand for the public. Go to slide 14, just 2 more questions. 14, a couple more. On Measure C, what happened to the 12 million? I'm trying to understand that, how it went from 46 to 34.
Yes, Vice Chair Friedman, let me try and explain this. And so in fiscal year 24, when we produced the Measure C project budget, what we also looked at wasn't just the annual amount of Measure C sales tax revenue that was going to come in fiscal year 24 to fund those projects. We also looked at available fund balance in the fund. Coming off the tail end of COVID, when the economy was growing and was going, and our revenues rebounded pretty significantly, our tourism industry through TOT and sales tax in fiscal year 2022 and fiscal year 2023, both of those revenue sources came in higher than what we budgeted. And so we had available unappropriated cash sitting in the Measure C fund from those prior couple of years. So in fiscal year 24, we looked at all that cash because we want to spend that money. That's money that the voters approved back in 2017. So we appropriated not only the annual amount of sales tax revenue that's going to come in, but we also appropriated the cash that was sitting in the fund. That's why the adopted budget in Measure C was $46 million. And then just to align our revised budget with the actual expenses that were going to occur, that's why the revised budget is lower. It's simply kind of a technical reporting presentation, if you will, of it. It doesn't change the fact that we went ahead and budgeted all of that cash that was in the fund.
Okay, so it's basically carryover from the prior year because those revenues were so high. We'd already allocated our project lists, and so even though we had the extra revenue, we didn't have the capacity to do the extra 12 million or so in work, so that money from that 1 year just carried it over.
That's correct. And for capital projects in particular, it's very common that you appropriate the amount of money you need to complete the entire project all in the first year, right, to let out a construction contract. But it may take 2 or 3 years or sometimes even longer to complete all of the work. So you're always going to have some carry forward appropriation for capital projects in particular.
Okay, and my last question, I think it's slide 8. I'm trying to understand this. If you could just explain, it says the deficit is 7.7. But yet we have the carryover that you explained earlier. So some of that is you have a multi-year project, as you explained, that you would carry over as an expenditure in the next 1 or 2 years, however long it is. Are there any revenues that carry over into those future years, such as in the staff report, I think it mentioned ARPA, so if we have leftover revenue from ARPA, we've only expended, say 50% of it in the next year, we're carrying over that other 50% in expenditures. Do we carry over the revenue into the next year, or is this just on the expenditure side, that number there?
Yes, Vice Chair Friedman, it's a great question. And so when we talk about carry forwards, what we're really talking about is expenditure carry forward. It's expenditure appropriation on a particular project or a program or what have you. With ARPA, we got federal grant money for the ARPA funded projects. And so that is unspent money that has to be spent on those projects. For sort of normal carryover expenditure work, it requires the use of fund balance effectively. So what revenue isn't expended in fiscal year 24 then kind of falls to fund balance, and then it will be used in the next fiscal year when that work is actually completed.
Okay, so the revenue, when it's not specific like an ARPA type, it goes into the general fund balance.
Correct.
And that accounts for it. So that number is correct in that it's 7.7 because it is an expenditure. I just wanted to understand if the 7.7 was an accounting and the deficit was lower because of the accounting of the carryover, but
Yeah.
that is the actual deficit.
It is at this time. Again, these numbers are preliminary, and so over the next 3 months, we will be finalizing our financial statements where we really lay that out. And when we issue our annual comprehensive financial report, we will present what the reserves look like as well. It's too early to do that at this time. There are many, there's a great deal of analysis that goes into producing our final reserve schedule. So we can talk about what's in our reserves for disaster reserves, contingency reserves, what's in our reserves for those prior year commitments, right? Those are commitments we've made as an organization. We will also articulate that as well.
And so if the public or anyone was to ask us, what is the estimated, ask a member, any of us, what's the estimated deficit of the city for, I guess, fiscal year 24 that we
Correct.
just went through? 7.7 is the number.
Vice Chair Friedman, that is correct at this time.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Harmon? I have 3 questions. On the position change, slide 23. For number 2, the reclassification of vacant position for Geographic Information System Coordinator. Can anybody speak on behalf of? If you could please just for education purpose for the public, and I know it's on the staff report, but just quickly, why this position is, yeah, thank you.
Chair Gutierrez
Not on? There we go. Sorry. The IT administrator position is focused for GIS. And so all of our programs in IT follow classifications of a technician, an analyst, an administrator. GIS didn't do that. One of the first objectives in GIS with a GIS strategic plan was to have dedicated supervision. So once that position was created and we have a supervisor, the coordinator remained vacant. That position was pseudo a technical position and supervision. So the creation of this position is to have dedicated supervision and to have the highest level technical lead over that program to help make the program more robust.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The next one is for the police department, reclassifying of a police technician to police service coordinator. Thank you, Chief. Just a little information on that position.
Chair Gutierrez, members of the committee, the individual who has been in that position has been performing, instead of technician duties, coordinator duties. And if we were to rehire for that position, we would hire a coordinator, not a technician. So they process a lot of permits. They have a lot of direct contact with the community. The other piece now is they actually present before a fire and police commission when we have appeals to any of that. So they are doing well beyond what is the duties of a technician. They're doing coordinator position duties, and actually there's no change in our budget because of it. We're using money that we had in our budget related to another position we eliminated that will fund the change in the salary for that position.
Thank you. And then my last one is delete the vacant street maintains crew leader position. I was just really curious on this position because that crew is very important to the city. So if you could just explain why
Yeah,
we're deleting that position.
Good
Yeah.
afternoon, Chair Gutierrez. We did something that's kind of unique. We consolidated.
Okay.
And so in this case, and this was done earlier in the year, and this is just the kind of cleaning up of the paperwork of it. We elevated 2 positions and eliminated 1. So that provided Public Works, the city, with a net savings. So that's what happened here. So same function, getting the job done, but with fewer people.
Thank you. Thank you. And just to be clear, all positions are important, but a lot of people get to see the street guys a lot. So I was just, somebody brought it up from the public. We're like, what? Why are we deleting that
I
position?
agree with you completely.
Do we have any comments from the public?
Chair Gutierrez, no hands are raised.
Do we have any comments from members of the committee? No? Okay. Oh, Councilman. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Chair. I appreciate all the work that staff has put into this, balancing the budget at the end of the year. It's a lot of work and a lot of numbers. It's still going on. As you said, it'll be finalized in the next few months as you're preparing the next year. But this shows where we are, and it also has the positions that we went through at council. So I am moving the staff recommendations.
I agree wholeheartedly, and I will second.
And take,
So motion made by Vice Chair Freeman, seconded by Committee Member Harmon. We'll start with Committee Member Harmon.
Yes.
Vice Chair Freeman.
Yes.
Chair Gutierrez.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. We're all done for today.
Thank you very much.